What if I told you that Filipino DNA contains genetic echoes from extinct human species, bloodlines older than recorded history, and maritime connections that challenge everything we thought we knew about human migration? Filipino DNA is unlike anything else on Earth. It carries fragments from vanished cousins we barely understand, traces of seafaring peoples who crossed oceans millennia before Columbus, and genetic signatures that connect the Philippines to places thousands of miles away in ways that shouldn't be possible. This genetic combination defies simple explanation. It includes DNA from Denisovans, an extinct human species we only discovered in 2010. It contains the oldest continuous human lineages in Asia, and it reveals maritime networks so sophisticated they make Viking voyages look like casual weekend trips. But here's what will keep you watching. The deeper scientists dig into Filipino genetics, the more questions emerge. Questions about lost civilizations, forgotten migrations, and human species that vanished before we even knew they existed. So who really were the first Filipinos? And why does their DNA still puzzle the world's leading geneticists? The answers start with tiny bones in a cave that rewrote human history. What happens when a single foot bone forces scientists to rewrite the story of human evolution? In 2007, researchers exploring Callao Cave on the island of Luzon made a discovery that shattered our understanding of early humans in Southeast Asia. They found a foot bone no bigger than your thumb, but when they analyzed it, they realized they were looking at something that shouldn't exist. This wasn't Homo sapiens. It wasn't Neanderthal. It was something entirely new, Homo Luzonensis, a previously unknown human species that lived in the Philippines over 50,000 years ago. But Homo Luzonensis wasn't alone. The Tabon Cave discoveries in Palawan revealed human remains dating back 47,000 years, including the famous Tabon Man, proof that multiple waves of early humans had reached these islands far earlier than anyone imagined. Think about what this means. While our ancestors in Europe were still sharing the continent with Neanderthals, a completely different branch of the human family tree was already island hopping across Southeast Asia, developing unique adaptations, and possibly even creating tools and culture we've never discovered. The Philippines wasn't an empty archipelago waiting for humans to arrive. It was a crossroads where different human species encountered each other, interbred, and created something entirely unprecedented in human evolution. But the real mystery isn't just who these ancient humans were, it's how their genetic legacy survived to influence modern Filipinos in ways we're only beginning to understand. Because buried in Filipino DNA are traces of the most enigmatic human relatives we've ever discovered. How can DNA from a species discovered in Siberia show up in the highest concentrations on Earth in the Philippines? Denisovans are humanity's most mysterious extinct relatives. We know they existed because in 2010, scientists extracted DNA from a tiny finger bone found in a Siberian cave. But here's what's mind-bending. While we've found almost no Denisovan fossils, their genetic signature appears throughout modern human populations, but not evenly. Neanderthal DNA is spread relatively uniformly across non-African populations, usually around 1 to 3%. But Denisovan DNA? It's concentrated almost exclusively in Southeast Asia, Melanesia, and Oceania, creating a genetic puzzle that suggests these extinct humans had a completely different evolutionary story. And then scientists made a discovery that changed everything. In 2021, researchers studying the Aita Magbukan people, an indigenous group in the Philippines, found something extraordinary. These populations carry nearly 5% Denisovan DNA, the highest concentration found anywhere on Earth, even higher than Papua New Guineans, who were previously thought to have the strongest Denisovan genetic signature. But why the Philippines? How did DNA from extinct humans, known primarily from a cave in Siberia, end up most concentrated in Southeast Asian island populations? The answer lies in isolation and time. While mainland Asian populations experienced multiple waves of migration that diluted ancient genetic signatures, island populations like those in the Philippines preserve these ancestral lineages like genetic time capsules. What this means is revolutionary. Modern Filipinos aren't just carrying traces of extinct human DNA. They're carrying the strongest echoes of our species' most mysterious relatives. But that's not even the strangest part of the story. Because this ancient DNA didn't just survive, it gave modern humans evolutionary superpowers. What if the DNA from extinct humans didn't just survive by accident, but because it gave modern humans abilities they couldn't develop on their own? Denisovan DNA isn't randomly scattered through modern genomes. It's concentrated in specific genes that provide measurable survival advantages. The most famous example comes from Tibet, where Denisovan DNA variants in the EPAS1 gene allow modern humans to thrive at high altitudes that would be deadly to most people. But high-altitude adaptation is just the beginning. Recent studies suggest that Denisovan genetic variants in Southeast Asian populations may have provided advantages for tropical disease resistance, heat tolerance, and immune system responses to pathogens that early humans had never encountered. Think about what this implies. When modern humans migrated into Southeast Asia, they encountered environments filled with diseases, parasites, and challenges their African-adapted immune systems couldn't handle. But the extinct humans already living there, the Denisovans, had spent hundreds of thousands of years developing genetic solutions to these problems. When these two human lineages met and interbred, the result wasn't just cultural exchange. It was genetic rescue. Modern humans literally inherited the biological tools they needed to survive in environments that should have killed them. This is why Denisovan DNA concentrations are highest in the populations that face the most challenging tropical environments. Islands like the Philippines, where early humans had to adapt to unique disease loads, climate extremes, and geographic isolation. What we call Filipino DNA isn't just the result of ancient migrations. It includes survival tools from a species that vanished before recorded history began, but left behind the genetic keys to thriving in one of Earth's most challenging environments. But Denisovans aren't the only ancient lineage preserved in Filipino genetics. There's an even older story written in these genes. What would you say if I told you that some Filipino populations carry genetic signatures from the very first humans to leave Africa, and that these bloodlines have survived unbroken for 50,000 years? The Negrito peoples of the Philippines, including the Ayita, Agta, and Ati populations, represent something almost impossible to find anywhere else on Earth: direct genetic descendants of the earliest out-of-Africa human migration. When our species first expanded beyond Africa around 60 to 70,000 years ago, one branch of this migration moved quickly through South Asia and into Southeast Asia, reaching Australia by at least 50,000 years ago. These were humanity's first great ocean navigators, the pioneers who figured out how to cross water barriers and survive in an entirely new continent. But while most of these early populations were later displaced or genetically swamped by subsequent migrations, the island geography of the Philippines created refugia isolated pockets where these original lineages could survive. What this means is extraordinary. When you look at Negrito populations in the Philippines, you're looking at genetic time travelers. Their DNA contains information about human diversity that existed before agriculture, before complex civilizations, before most of the genetic mixing that characterizes modern populations. These aren't just historically important populations. They're living libraries of human genetic information that exists nowhere else on Earth. Their languages preserve words that may date to humanity's first migrations. Their cultural practices maintain knowledge systems developed by the first humans to navigate open oceans. But around 4,000 years ago, these ancient populations encountered something that would change the Philippines forever: the arrival of some of history's most accomplished seafarers. And the meeting of these two groups would create the modern Filipino genetic signature. Imagine seafaring people so skilled they could navigate thousands of miles of open ocean using only stars, currents, and wave patterns. And they did this 2,000 years before Vikings crossed the North Atlantic. Around 4,000 years ago, Austronesian-speaking peoples began one of the most remarkable migrations in human history. Starting from Taiwan, these maritime specialists spread across the Pacific in an expansion so rapid and extensive it still amazes archaeologists today. But calling them migrants understates their achievement. These were master navigators who developed sophisticated sailing technologies, created detailed mental maps of ocean currents and seasonal wind patterns, and established trade networks that connected islands separated by thousands of miles of open water. Their linguistic legacy tells the story. Austronesian languages now stretch from Madagascar to Easter Island, making it the most geographically widespread language family on Earth. Filipino languages like Tagalog, Cebuano, and Ilocano are part of this same family, connecting modern Filipinos to a maritime heritage that spans the Pacific. But here's what makes the Philippines situation unique. Unlike in many other locations, the arriving Austronesians didn't replace the existing Negrito populations. Instead, they blended with them, creating a genetic fusion that combined the deep indigenous knowledge of the islands with the advanced seafaring technologies of the newcomers. This wasn't conquest, it was synthesis. The result was populations that carried both the ancient survival wisdom of the first Southeast Asians and the innovative maritime culture of the Pacific's greatest navigators. Modern Filipino genetics reflects this fusion. Ancient Negrito lineages, providing tropical adaptation and local knowledge, combined with Austronesian genes that carried the technologies and cultural practices that would eventually populate half the Pacific Ocean. But the story of Filipino genetic complexity was just beginning, because the Philippines' position at the crossroads of maritime trade routes would bring even more surprising connections. What if I told you that genetic analysis reveals Filipino populations have ancestral connections, not just to neighboring Southeast Asian groups, but to Polynesians, Micronesians, and even populations as distant as Hawaii? Modern population genetic studies have revealed something that challenges our assumptions about ancient Pacific navigation. The ocean wasn't a barrier between island populations, but a highway connecting them in complex networks of contact and exchange. Genetic markers in Filipino populations show clear signatures of contact with Polynesian and Micronesian groups, but not just the one-way eastward migration we might expect. The patterns suggest bidirectional contact, not just Austronesians moving east from the Philippines, but later back migrations, bringing Polynesian and Micronesian genetic signatures west into the Philippines. Archaeological evidence supports this genetic picture. Jade ornaments found in Philippine sites match geological signatures from Taiwan, but worked in styles that appear in Polynesian contexts. Obsidian tools show trade networks that connected the Philippines to volcanic islands hundreds of miles away. Rock art and ceramic styles reveal cultural exchanges across distances that should have been impossible for ancient seafarers. What emerges is a picture of the Philippines not as an isolated archipelago, but as a central hub in a sophisticated network of Pacific maritime cultures. These weren't random contacts, they represent systematic, repeated interactions between island populations across vast distances. This means that Filipino DNA contains genetic signatures from some of the most accomplished seafaring peoples in human history, populations that maintained contact networks across distances larger than entire continents. But the story of Filipino genetic diversity doesn't end with Pacific connections, because the Philippines' strategic location would eventually make it a crossroads for global trade routes that connected not just Asian populations, but the entire world. How did a collection of islands in Southeast Asia become one of the world's first truly global genetic melting pots, with DNA connections reaching from Mexico to the Middle East? The Spanish conquest of the Philippines in 1571 created something unprecedented in human history: a regular trade connection between Asia and the Americas. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade didn't just exchange goods, it exchanged people, creating genetic connections across the Pacific that had never existed before. Genetic analysis of Filipino populations reveals clear signatures of this global exchange. Native American genetic markers appear in some Filipino populations, carried by sailors, traders, and settlers who made the Pacific crossing. European genetic signatures reflect not just Spanish colonization, but the complex mix of peoples involved in managing a global empire. But the Spanish period only intensified existing patterns. Chinese merchants had been trading with the Philippines for centuries, creating Sino-Filipino communities whose genetic legacy is visible throughout the archipelago. South Asian and Arab traders established communities in Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago, bringing genetic signatures that connect modern Filipinos to populations from India to the Arabian Peninsula. What makes this remarkable is the timing. While most of the world's populations remained relatively isolated until the modern era, Filipino populations were experiencing global genetic mixing centuries earlier. The Philippines became humanity's first experiment in truly global genetic diversity, a place where the maritime networks of the Pacific, the trade routes of the Indian Ocean, and the colonial connections of the Atlantic all converged in a single archipelago. But despite all this mixing and connection, some of the deepest mysteries in Filipino genetics remain unsolved. Here's what should keep you awake at night. Filipino populations carry some of the highest concentrations of extinct human DNA on Earth. But we've found almost no fossils of these extinct humans in the Philippines itself. Think about this paradox. Filipinos have more Denisovan DNA than any other population, but Denisovan fossils are almost entirely absent from the Philippines. We know Homo Luzonensis lived in the islands, but we've found only tiny fragments of their remains. The genetic evidence suggests multiple extinct human lineages contributed to modern Filipino ancestry, but the fossil record is almost completely silent. This creates a haunting possibility. What if the Philippines was home to extinct human populations that left virtually no physical trace, but whose genetic legacy makes up a significant portion of modern Filipino DNA? Recent advances in ancient DNA extraction are revealing human genetic diversity that far exceeds what we see in the fossil record. Every new study seems to identify previously unknown human lineages, extinct populations that interbred with our ancestors but left no bones for us to find. The Philippines, with its complex geography, tropical climate, and thousands of islands, represents exactly the kind of environment where small populations of extinct humans could have survived for millennia, interbreeding with successive waves of modern humans, while leaving minimal archaeological evidence. This suggests a disturbing possibility. We may be drastically underestimating human diversity in Southeast Asia. Filipino genetics may preserve evidence of extinct human lineages that science hasn't even discovered yet. What other human relatives lived alongside our ancestors? How many human species have vanished without leaving fossils for us to find? And what can Filipino genetics tell us about the true complexity of human evolution? The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. What does it mean to carry the genetic heritage of humanity's most complex evolutionary story? Every Filipino carries a genetic signature that tells the story of human evolution itself. Ancient Negrito ancestry connects them to humanity's first expansion out of Africa. Denisovan genetic variants provide biological adaptations developed by extinct human species. Austronesian lineages carry the heritage of the Pacific's greatest navigators. But it doesn't stop there. Chinese, Indian, Arab, Spanish, and even Native American genetic signatures reflect the Philippines' unique position as a global crossroads. Filipino DNA isn't just diverse, it's a microcosm of the entire human story. This genetic complexity creates something remarkable. Filipino populations represent one of the most complete pictures we have of human evolutionary and cultural diversity. They carry biological adaptations from extinct human species, cultural knowledge from the world's first ocean navigators, and genetic connections that span every inhabited continent. In a very real sense, Filipino genetics represents humanity's most comprehensive experiment in biological and cultural fusion. It's what happens when the deep indigenous knowledge of Southeast Asia, the maritime innovations of Pacific navigators, and the global connections of early modern trade networks all converge in a single population. But perhaps most importantly, Filipino genetics proves that human diversity isn't about separate, distinct populations. It's about continuous mixing, adaptation, and the creative fusion of different human lineages over tens of thousands of years. Filipino DNA may be complex, but that complexity tells the most complete story we have of what it means to be human. So here's what I want you to remember. Filipino genetics aren't strange because they're unique. They're remarkable because they're complete. Filipinos today carry the strongest genetic echoes of humanity's forgotten relatives, the biological innovations of our species' most accomplished seafarers, and the cultural fusion of our planet's first global trade networks. Their DNA preserves genetic information from extinct human species, maintains the oldest continuous human lineages in Asia, and documents maritime connections that span the Pacific thousands of years before European exploration. But here's what I really want to know. Do you have Filipino ancestry? Have you ever had genetic testing that revealed unexpected connections to Southeast Asian populations? Please comment below and tell me about your own genetic discoveries. Your family's story might connect to these ancient maritime networks in ways you never imagined. If this journey through the genetics of human evolution fascinated you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're exploring the hidden genetic stories that connect all of humanity, and every subscription helps us dive deeper into these incredible discoveries. And please share this video with anyone who's interested in genetics, human evolution, or the amazing diversity of human populations. When you share content like this, you're helping people understand the complex beauty of human heritage. Filipino DNA may be the most complex on Earth, but maybe that's because it tells the most complete story of human evolution, migration, and the endless creativity of our species in adapting to new worlds. Comment with your genetic stories, subscribe for more human evolution content, and share to help others discover the remarkable science of human diversity. Thanks for watching.